Set mainly in Mpumalanga and the Western Cape, Michelle Edwards' latest book, Go Away Birds, tells the story of a woman named Skye who seems to have lost it. Described as a finely observed novel about connections, Michelle takes us deep into Skye's memory pockets to detail and highlight everyday South African stories through the eyes of a woman. To tell us more about this offering and how this story haunted her, Michelle Edwards joins us now via Zoom. Michelle, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
In your words, just give us a brief outline of what this book is all about and what inspired it.
So this book, as you said, is about Skye. She's a chef in her early 30s. She and her very new husband co-own Cape Town's trendiest restaurant. This is the kind of place that literally has queues around the block every night for people to get inside. And when the story opens, Skye is living the life she always dreamed and hoped she would live. But she makes a naive mistake in an interview with a high-profile foodie magazine, and this puts the business in jeopardy and puts her marriage in jeopardy. When this happens, Skye flees. She leaves her husband and his family. They were together over the Christmas break in Misty Cliffs, which is on the South Peninsula of the Western Cape. She goes back home to the farm where she grew up in Mpumalanga between White River and Hazyview. And there she sees her mother for the first time in 9 years. It's the first time she's been back in 9 years. And while she's there, she has to think of a way forward for herself. She needs to think of what she is going to do about her marriage, about her career. And she also needs to sort of come to grips with her very difficult relationship with her mother and also reconcile this upbringing she had, which was really unconventional, and kind of grapple with how that shaped who she became as an adult.
Now, Skye is always on this quest to find what she deems as normal. Take us through this aspect of the book.
I wrote this in my early 30s. I started writing it about 5 years ago. And I think it's a time of our lives when we're thinking of, settling down, thinking about what we want sort of long term. And I don't think any of us feels normal. I think we all feel like, there's something about everyone else. There's this glossy sheen on everyone else. And we feel kind of awkward and strange in ourselves. I think that's kind of the human condition. But Skye feels particularly different to everyone else because of the upbringing she had on this farm with her mother and her mother's partner and the boy that she grew up with as her brother.
Yeah.
And so, she's come from a very difficult, very unconventional background. And I do think you're absolutely right. Like her whole adult life, she's been trying to fit in and trying to make a life that she always thought would feel normal and would feel right.
Yeah, and she's apparently trying to deal with being haunted by her past and having to deal with a dysfunctional family as well. Without giving much away, of course, tell us more about her struggles.
Skye, you find out quite early, so I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, has suffered a recent trauma, which she has buried and kept a secret. This informs a lot of her actions throughout the novel. And for anyone in their early 30s not to have spoken to their mother in 9 years that's significant. And it also shows just how desperate she is and the state of the crisis she's in when this social media storm is unleashed by this mistake she makes in an interview. For her to choose to go back home, I think it really questions and put into kind of the stark relief for me what it means to go home back to where you grew up if you hadn't been there for so long and hadn't spoken to, people who should be really close to you for such a long time, and kind of how that would change who you are as a person, just going back and remembering who you were when you lived there.
Michelle, I quite liked how you used Skye's journey to highlight, some positive and disruptive patterns that people use to deal with their, past traumas, and more especially experienced earlier in life. Now, speak to us more about her coping mechanisms, as you detail them in this book.
Such a good question. So Skye's coping mechanisms are extremely dysfunctional. I'm not a psychologist or I'm not an expert in mental health, but what I wanted to do with this book was show a woman who seems to have everything together at the start and to trace her unraveling. And a lot of this unraveling has to do with how she's suppressed this recent trauma that I spoke about, but also how she's suppressed a trauma that took place 9 years ago. And 9 years is significant because that's the last time she was home. So I tried to do it without telling the reader, Skye is damaged, Skye is in crisis, Skye is suffering, and instead tried to show it through her actions, her interactions with people, and sort of in her own mental state. But the important thing I think about Skye is that she doesn't know who she is, and she's not very self-aware at the beginning of the book, and the book is sort of her journey to self-awareness. So that was quite challenging for me, was to paint a picture of a person and to tell it from the first person perspective. The book is all I and me from Skye's perspective. To do that as with a character who doesn't actually know what she feels, doesn't know how to analyze her own reactions, I found that quite challenging, but I think really interesting because it gave me the opportunity to let Skye do and say rather than for me to tell the reader what she was going through.
And this book touches on some of the issues that are prevalent in our society today, such as mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder, and how we define being normal. Just tell us why this was an important aspect for you and something for you to highlight and explore in this book.
I think I'm going to answer your question in a way that puts Skye and myself in very different camps. So
Sure.
I get asked a lot, is this about you? A lot of people who've read it, who know a little bit about my background, think that I was writing about myself. I do share that I spent most of my teenage years in this area of the Lowveld where Skye grew up, and I've spent a lot of time on the South Peninsula as well. But other than that, Skye and I are very, very different, and I'm so happy for that. I've had such a happy, lucky, blessed life compared to Skye, but
Yeah.
her life is a lot more interesting than mine, which is why I chose to write about that. And Skye's struggles are not my struggles, but I think they are struggles that a lot of people can relate to.
Let's talk about some of the other themes that you've highlighted through this book, such as relationships, connection, loss, and family dynamics, to mention just a few.
So those themes are universal, I think, and to me, they're the most important things about life: connections, family relationships, and romantic relationships, love relationships, relationships with your children, your parents. I just feel like, is there anything more important in the world than the health of those relationships? I don't think there is. And those family dynamics to me are so, so interesting. The beginning of the book is a lot about Skye's interactions with her in-laws. And as I said earlier, she hasn't been married long. She wasn't with her husband for very long before they got married. So she's very new and newly introduced to these dynamics in his family, which I also think are so interesting because, we have the family we grew up with and we know more or less where we fit in that dynamic. But when we're in a serious relationship with someone and we start being kind of slotting into their family, where you fit in is somewhere that you have to figure out for yourself, and the whole family needs to figure that out. It can be, and that can be quite a difficult, tense time in a person's life when they like, oh wow, so now I have this new family and it's wonderful and they're such wonderful people, but I don't really know how I fit into this. So that's something that I find personally very interesting.
All right, Michelle, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And where can we get a copy of this book?
At all good bookstores. You can order it directly from the publisher, which is Mojaji Books. I see you've got my website address at the bottom there. You can also order a signed and inscribed copy directly from me. I will courier it to your door. It's also available online through online retailers. It's on Kindle if you are an ebooks person like myself. It's on the Amazon store. So you should be able to find it anywhere.
All right, Michelle, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.